Thank you very much indeed, Will, and thanks for attending. I'll try and keep this short because I know there are a few things that are worse than keeping people from lunch. But I'm really going to talk about a site that it's really a website that we set up about 5 months ago now. But I just want to start off with a story. I had a haircut the other day, and people might think that's a strange thing for a balding middle-aged person, and I probably got ripped off. But the purpose of mentioning that is that in the background they were playing music, as you hear in quite a lot of retail outlets these days. But the thing that was different was that they were actually promoting their own business. Okay, so they'd play music and then they'd say, this business is, do this, do that, blah, blah. Until a couple of years ago, we had an independent grocery store near us. It was taken over by one of the major groups. And whenever I go in there now, I hear Coles radio. Okay, they're actually broadcasting that on digital radio. So it's a brand, if you like, using the medium of radio to get their own message across, unfiltered. It's not advertising. The whole thing is their content. The reason I'm telling you the story is that, and I don't know how many of you got to Tony's talk yesterday, but he made the point, and I think he's absolutely right, that audio is coming into its own on the internet. And my background is, in recent years as a volunteer, was with a Canberra community radio station. How many people here listen to community radio, if I could ask? A few, okay. How many of you have actually presented or been involved in some way? That's good, okay. Thank you. Community radio's been going for about 50 years, and it's different from commercial radio. There are restrictions on the amount of sponsorship you can have, and you really do have to fairly well define the purpose for which you're broadcasting. I'll talk later about why we decided to go with webcasting rather than with traditional broadcasting. Okay. So why webcast? I'm going to talk about creating content. Tony covered that fairly well yesterday, I thought. So I won't go into that in huge detail, although there are a few little differences. I particularly want to focus today on using other people's material because it's for radio, it's a big deal. I'll talk about the technicalities of getting a stream onto the internet, how you then present your content using WordPress, and the final one, which is the big one, is how to get people to listen to them and give them a reason for doing so. Okay, very briefly, my career began as a newspaper journalist. I've had 2 stints at that. I created my first web pages in the early 1990s, and that was all hand-coded. I was crying out back in, and I was working for government at the time, we were crying out for something like WordPress, but there were no content management systems available at that time. So I've been using WordPress as my CMS of choice for about 12 years. Most of my work has been for non-profits. There is some federal government use of WordPress, but not a huge amount. As I mentioned, I was in community radio for about 10 years, and I worked with my wife Barbie as a volunteer. We produced a lot of arts material. We set up Living Arts for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into here. We decided to basically pull back from the station that we'd been involved with, and we set up Living Arts Canberra in July. Now, the difference between our site and our enterprise, if you like, and most conventional radio websites is that we're primarily a website with audio content rather than being a radio station with a website attached. And that's an important distinction, I think. So we're using webcasting to promote website content rather than the other way around. That's our rationale, to provide local arts, music and community sector with an outlet that they don't have. And we're now moving into areas such as schools. We've just done the first of a series of first pilot with some children from the school that my grandchildren attend, where the teachers actually got them to write a radio script, and we've recorded that and we will edit that and then play that back at an assembly. And what we're trying to do there is teach kids about how to gather information, how to do research, how to do it ethically, and how to present it. And it's going to be a very valuable exercise, I think. So our particular focus is the arts, but we look into the future as well. The site, which I'll have a live demonstration of shortly, I hope, if all goes well, is we chose actually quite a feminine theme, and the reason for that is that the majority of people in the arts that I'm aware of are women. So it is directed not only at women, of course, but it is particularly just to serve the arts community. At this stage, it's mostly interviews, but interspersed with music. It's the music. Music is essential in any radio station. I don't know of any station that broadcasts 24 hours a day, and that's basically the expectation now, where they don't intersperse, where they don't have music. It's extremely difficult to produce enough interesting talk content 24 hours a day. Okay, I'm going to make some, just briefly go through some of the terminology because it is a bit confusing. I'm using when I say podcasting, I'm talking about on-demand audio, where users can select the content and the time at which they listen to it. Whereas webcasting is a continuous stream. Okay, users don't have any control over the sequence. And that's an important distinction, at least as far as music licensing is concerned, because they are distinct sets of licenses. And if you're going to set up an internet streaming service, you need to be conscious of this and conscious of the fact that if you're going to do both, and you're going to have copyright music, then you need separate licenses. There are things like Periscope now. There's a reference which I'll give you at the end of this talk, which are kind of pop-up broadcasting, if you like. You're not webcasting continuously, but for special occasions you can put that content up. Essentially, we do webcasting and podcasting. I put that in inverted commas because it's not quite the same as some of the podcasts you might listen to where there's music and stuff. We deliberately avoid putting copyright music into our podcasts, basically for licensing reasons. But these are some of the reasons that we decided to go with webcasting rather than with trying to duplicate, have another radio station. It is actually very difficult to go along and say, I want to set up a broadcast station. There are huge costs involved. There's a big process involved. You'll see there, the station we came from had an annual budget, I think, of close to $300,000 a year. A large proportion of that is licensing fees, and it's also electricity. When you're pumping out a lot of power, it costs a lot of money. The advantage of webcasting is you don't actually need a license to do webcast per se, although you do to play copyright music. It's basically unlimited. You really just need a reliable internet connection, and most people have that today. Most people have download limits which are perfectly adequate for receiving or even for getting a signal up there. You've got theoretically worldwide coverage, which is both a benefit and a blessing, both a blessing and a curse, I guess. I mean, we are deliberately quite local, although we do cover people who have been performing in Canberra or are coming to Canberra, and sometimes we cover international people as well. The biggest issue with webcasting, frankly, is getting people to listen. Because people, we say to them, we've set up an internet radio station, and the first question is, oh, what frequency is it on? It doesn't work like that. Oh, yes. Okay, I was talking a bit about music, and I'll go to a live demonstration shortly. But here are some statistics that I got from the International Federation of Phonographic Industry. Now that's the sort of the peak body, if you like, for music publishers throughout the world. And I found these figures very interesting, that people do listen to a lot of music. Not surprisingly, being on the road is the most popular listening location. 86% of us listen to music through online streaming. I found that figure quite... I was quite amazed when I saw that, actually. But interestingly, nearly half of that comes through YouTube. Go figure. But what I was saying before about being local genres tend to be the most popular. So what we do is we use WordPress for a number of things on the site, and I'll go to a live demonstration shortly. We provide a self-service event calendar where people can put up their events, and we will follow up. We'll often follow up those with interviews and previews and reviews. We use it to display program schedules. I'll give you a short demonstration of that shortly. We use it to present the content through an HTML5 player. Now, has anyone else had an experience with HTML5 audio? Yeah, how'd you find it? Yeah, it's I've done a lot of work on this, and it's the one, I'm a great believer in standards, and it's the one thing that seems to work with just about every platform. Works with Apple, works with Android, it works with most browsers. But you do have there are a limited number of plugins that can handle streaming audio as opposed to as opposed to MP3s on your site. We also use it to create playlists of current and archived interviews as podcasts. And keeping your site up to date is important, but for us it was important also to have an archive so that people could go back to interviews that were done in the past, and there's quite a big demand for that. Creating content, I won't say it's easy, but it's not terribly difficult, and Tony went into some detail about that yesterday, and I would agree with everything he said. You basically just need a good microphone, audio editing software, and in the case of webcasting, a way to encode your audio. That is, to put into a form where it can be streamed. In reality, as I say, you need music, and it needs to be in a digitized form. Probably MP3 is still the most widely used standard, and some providers require you have MP3. People expect a radio station, whether it's webcasting or traditional broadcasting, to be on air 24/7. That doesn't mean you have to you have to be up 24 hours a day creating new content. I don't know if any of you listen to Radio National, but they are almost getting now notorious for repeating stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that, because people listen at different times of the day. So if you're going to set up a stream, make sure that there's enough new content to keep people coming back, but that you're not making it right for your own back. We do a lot of recording via Skype. That's my wife sitting at our home studio. Things I'd point out is the PC there, obviously, a mixer just on the right, and a screen. We use an audio program called Hindenburg, but there are various alternatives available. Skype recording can actually be quite tricky. They changed the API a while back, and it's made it a little more difficult for some audio programs to capture it. We do a lot of interviews via Skype, and it's again much more cost-effective way than trying to set up a traditional analog to phone, digital analog phone box. There are advantages and disadvantages in doing live or pre-recording programs. Most of our stuff is pre-recorded. But whichever way you do it, there's a substantial time commitment. Now, live radio has the advantage of immediacy, I guess. It's more immediate, and you don't have to edit it. But there are huge, in broadcasting at least, where there's a lot of regulation, there are risks in doing live broadcasting, live interviews with people you don't know. That's why commercial stations have 7-second delays, so that if people start going off track, shall we say, that they can they can kill it. We tend to pre-record stuff because it means you can get a much more polished product. It's also easier with a lot of interviewers who are nervous. You can then sort of cut and paste it together, and it sounds much better. Keeping a station on air 24 hours a day is a real challenge, and most hosted streaming providers will give you the option of what they call an auto GJ service, where you can upload files, go into a scheduler and schedule your interviews on your music, and repeat it at whatever interval you want. The important thing here is, and it's an important distinction between sites like, or Facebook even, and I think SoundCloud. Once you upload to a site like that, you lose control of your content, potentially. If you're uploading third-party music, that is an absolute no-no. You can't go giving away other people's intellectual property. So if you do find a streaming provider, make sure that you are actually buying the service, and it's understood that you still have control of the content. Your stream needs to be encoded, so it comes out of your computer. There are basically free encoders available. I've not found any that are plugins to WordPress yet, but if anyone knows of any, I'd be pleased to hear about it. As I say, you can get an audio streaming provider. We use a commercial provider. There are some in Australia. There are quite a lot overseas. Or if you're really keen, you can set up your own Shoutcast or Icecast server. They're both freely available freely available. And you need to decide on what bitrate you're going to use. We use 64-bit stereo at 4100 kilohertz. We find that's a good balance between quality and cost, because the higher the bitrate, the more you're paying if you're using a hosted service. Before we go on to the music licenses, I might just see if we can get this live demo up to give you some idea of how the site works. So this is the home page of the site. We've got a slideshow here with current events, and I'll just go into this one. This was an interview we did the other day. It's a exhibition at Old Parliament House in Canberra of quilts, and so we interviewed this young lady and a couple of other people. Written a bit of a blog about it, and maybe this will work. Maybe. Nope, we can't hear it. Anyway, so that's about a 20-minute interview. It's actually 3 interviews with a bit of music, with a bit of unlicensed. Sorry, it's some license-free music that I found on the internet. Strictly speaking, we can't use copyright music because we don't actually have a podcasting license to use copyright music. But that's kind of how the site works. But we also list all our what we call podcasts. It's not, as I say, they're basically a list of interviews. And we list those as well, so people can refer to them under different categories. So we have a lot of author interviews, film festivals, arts and performing, visual arts and performing arts, and no doubt those categories will grow. And the people we interview find those valuable. They put them on their own. They put references to them on their own Facebook sites, and we're finding that people are really value the service because they're not getting it anywhere else. All right, we'll switch back to the slides. All right, let's talk about music licenses, and okay, I'll show both slides there. It's really important that you have the appropriate license. I don't know if any of you have read about, there's I think a cafe in Melbourne which was recently shut down because after various warnings, they kept playing copyright music, and the PPCA, which is the music publishers, which represents music publishers, basically went to court and they'll find a huge amount of money, went out of business. So it is really important, if you're getting into this business, that you have the appropriate licenses. There are various, I can't really go into the detail, there are a lot of permutations, but essentially if you're not for profit, it's not a terribly expensive business, but you do need to comply with the rules, which basically means you can't just sort of play 10 albums in a row of your favourite artist, things like that. They restrict the number of tracks that from a particular artist you can play in a particular time, and you do need to keep a record of what you're doing. There are two sets of copyrights. There's music creators, and there is, I say, artists and recording companies. You are required to take appropriate measures to stop people stream ripping. Again, you have to be seen to be doing the right thing. Whether you can stop everyone doing it at any time is a moot point. But again, these are the requirements of licenses. You may not be allowed to issue detailed playlists in advance. Again, that seems to be a sort of fairly archaic thing, but it's a condition of licenses. Not allowed to have copyright music on high rotation, and you need to keep a record of what you're playing and when. You can be asked for it. I'll just divert briefly, and I've mentioned this briefly in the session we had yesterday. We use Gutenberg quite a lot for our site, but this is one of the little issues we've had, and I'm told that it will be fixed in a future release, which I'm glad to hear. You'll see on the left there, that's a list of interviews, and that's how it appears in the classic editor. That's how it appears in the Gutenberg editor on the right. Yeah, doesn't handle it well. So we have to, basically if I want to add an interview, I have to work out what the ID number is and do it manually. So I tend to use the classic editor for that particular, for playlists, because it's something that hasn't yet been incorporated properly into Gutenberg. Otherwise, I've found we've had a few little quirks along the way, but I think Gutenberg is now at a stage where it suits us for the sort of thing that we're doing. All right, now the bit about presenting content to listeners, this is where WordPress has a number of things that you can use. You'll see on the right there, this is a screen capture from a site that I actually did for the radio station I was talking about before. A couple of things. That's a play button, and that appears on just about every page on the site, so you can just instantly listen to the audio. And down here is a list of programs that are coming up, and that's basically looks after itself. It's just a repeating calendar display. So all the programs are listed in the all-in-one calendar, and it's told to look at the next three. And so it was a good way of doing it so that we weren't constantly having to update it manually. And believe me, that's a huge issue. It's really important if you're going to be streaming to make your streaming player prominent. Otherwise, people aren't going to see it. And put your program guide on the website, and if you can, publish it to subscribers. again, don't be afraid to use social media for that. I want to talk about here about a technical issue, and if there's anyone here who can solve this for me, I'd be most grateful. We use Shoutcast, which basically relies partly on HTTP rather than HTTPS. On the display on these are screenshots. On the one on the left is what we do when we just use HTTPS, which the site generally is. And can you spot the difference? Okay. All right. With HTTPS, it's just publishing the name of the site. There's no playlist. Here, it's actually displaying what we're playing at the time. I'm told that that's a limitation of Shoutcast. I don't know, but it's something to be aware of. But it is good if you can publish playlists if you can publish tracks as they're playing. That's a great feature, and something that actually the licenses encourage. Okay, the last issue I really want to talk about is how you get people to listen. Now we don't make any changes about being a mass market site. We have a lot of restrictions placed on us because of the music licensing. One of which is we're not allowed to carry advertising. You can get licenses if you want to pay, 4 times as much. You can get a commercial license, which does mean you can put advertising onto the site. But the license we have doesn't allow us to do that, and that's fine because we're a community station. I guess the equivalent of it's like some people volunteer for Rotary. We do this on a voluntary basis, so it's not we don't expect revenue from advertising. It'd be nice to have it, but we don't. It's not a huge issue for us. But the option there is if we want to take advertising, we can, but we have to look at our licensing. How do you get people to? Okay, how many people have you listened to internet radio? If I can ask. Yeah. Okay. Can I ask how you do it? Sorry. Okay. I'll just go back. Okay. There's APRA and AMCOS. APRA is the Australian Performing Rights Association, and they cover the rights of music creators. I'll have some URLs at the end which you can look up, and the PPCA, which is which basically covers artists and recording companies, and you have to have licenses from both. They are going to combine sometime next year. Hopefully that'll simplify the process because it's a dog's breakfast at the moment. I'm sorry? Yeah. The other thing you can do, well, there are a couple of suggestions I've got if you do decide to do this. Most cars now have Bluetooth input, and we can basically, as you did with the old iPods, you can use Bluetooth or a wired connection. Or an old tablet or phone can be a low-cost internet radio receiver. I've got several of them at home, perfectly good for the job. Or you can use one of those. That's an internet-capable radio. It's got it does FM and DAB+ as well, and you'll see there that it's actually showing you the track it's playing. Unfortunately, there's not a great variety of them available, and they are quite expensive. So for most people, a mobile or a desktop computer is probably a better solution. A few other things to think about. Hiding your station's URL behind an HTML5 player. I say that because you don't necessarily want to be giving out the actual URL of the station in case you change providers. Whereas if it's stuck behind a player, you can change that behind the scenes and no one's going to know the difference. You need to be aware of latency, so it's not like traditional broadcasting where you can broadcast a time signal and know that time is accurate. A typical latency is up to 30 seconds or more, depends on where your provider is, Depends on internet speeds and all that sort of stuff. Most so 3G and 4G is perfectly adequate. You're not going to have problems with dropouts, but you will have a delay, and you can actually notice that if you listen to either a web stream from an existing station or even the difference between an FM and a DAB plus station. You'll find there's quite a big delay. Thank you. There's some references and links which I'll include with the presentation. That's the one I referred to earlier. International Federation. That's the APRA AMCOS, PPCA, and that's a reference about Periscope. All right, I'll be happy to take questions and any feedback.